Okie dokie. Well, thanks everyone who's joined the call. My name's Thomas Flynn. I'm a consultant and so-called expert in 3D and cultural heritage, previously working at the British Museum and Sketchfab. I know a fair few of you on this call, and we've interacted over the years, and I am conducting this research project in partnership with Wikimedia UK and funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. I'm going to switch to share my screen now. Oh no, that was the wrong way to do that. So, can everyone see that okay? If anyone just gives me an okay, that would be very helpful. I'm going to assume that you can see this okay. As I said, the session's being recorded for later online publication. Notes are being taken with Jamie AI. You can find these links in the document pinned in the chat, and there's a link to this presentation deck as well. I'm going to try and go through this fairly quickly. Seeing as we've got a lot of people on this call, I'd like to really tap into your brains if I can. So why does the project exist? What's the problem? And essentially, it's related to the fact that many UK heritage organisations rely on sketchfab.com for publishing and sharing 3D data online, as well as various platform tools. So within Sketchfab, so 3D scene setup, annotations, AR and VR, to enable them to do everything from storytelling to scientific communication and everything in between. And while Sketchfab is a great product, I really, enjoyed working there, and I think it's a great tool. Changes being made by the platform owners, a lack of alternatives, and variable data governance practice within heritage organisations when using platforms like Sketchfab are causes for concern. So, just as a quick sort of snapshot of UK heritage data on the Sketchfab platform, there's it's over 230 UK heritage organisations, and I'm classifying heritage organisations as the classic galleries, libraries, archives, museums, archaeology companies, commercial archaeology companies, non-profits, educational projects, anyone who's digitising and publishing heritage data, either as a UK organisation or publishing data that's related to the UK. And so there's about 11,000 plus 3D models just from that sample, and those users also have about 63,000 followers. So that's members of the public and professionals who have used the social tools on Sketchfab to follow as people publish more data. And the aim of the project then is to help safeguard access to the UK's digital 3D heritage data at risk through over-reliance on commercial and free-to-use platforms for storage and dissemination. And I want to stress that the problem, even though this project focuses on Sketchfab, it's not Sketchfab specific. Using any sort of third-party or commercial platform can carry similar risks. So it's not necessarily about not using a platform like Sketchfab, it's about using it in a way that is not going to affect long-term access to data. And I mean access in terms of downloading the data, but also interacting with the data, not finding a broken link or that data has been removed. So we have this at-risk 3D data existing somewhere, Sketchfab in this case, and the idea of the project is to develop some kind of strategic plan that gives a better outlook for long-term archive and access to data. And I'll kind of be talking about archival data and interactive data and accessible data a lot, actually, and this seems to be a theme that's coming up through the project so far. Just a quick idea of the scope of the project. There are limitations on the project. It's just me working on it over 8 months, from November through to sort of June this year. And it's very much focused on the Sketchfab risk event, and the target for the research are UK cultural heritage stakeholders, so specifically users of Sketchfab, as I mentioned. And we're seeking to hear from a range of organisation sizes, types and locations, so not just in England, but across the whole of the UK. Some themes that are, present at the beginning, but also kind of coming out through the initial sort of chats and feedback that I've been getting are the uncertainty and lack of control regarding commercial hosting, recognizing the difference between expert and non-expert user needs and audience needs. Everyone that I speak to, or every organization I speak to, generally will have very specific audiences that they're trying to reach with their 3D data. Long-term 3D data storage and available options for that, but also online data display and dissemination needs. So that's not just the 3D models themselves, but metadata and paradata and storytelling tools as well. And there are more besides as well. The sort of there'll be a few, I suppose, sub themes within the research that I'm doing. So environmental sustainability, financial viability of platforms that exist or potential platforms that could be developed, looking at copyright and licensing, ethical issues around data handling and inclusive workflows and accessibility. So it's kind of trying to take a snapshot and map out what platforms that exist right now, how they handle these things, how heritage organizations are thinking about or not thinking about these aspects, and projecting into the future, thinking about what a platform for cultural heritage 3D data should or might look like. So some key questions: which heritage organizations are using Sketchfab, and we kind of know that, and what kind of data are they generating? What are the alternatives to Sketchfab for archival storage or for interactive dissemination? So again, separating those two a little bit there. How can UK heritage organizations back up and extract data from Sketchfab and make their 3D data resilient to third-party platform changes? So you may be familiar with the idea of vendor lock-in, that you use a particular product and then you have to keep using it because the data that you have either generated or put into that platform it will only work with that platform. So there's a question, or perhaps an opportunity, of exploring how to make people feel comfortable with using, or more comfortable with using, a platform like Sketchfab, so that the data isn't locked into an ecosystem. Is there other ways to extract it? And in general, to develop kind of, I suppose, ways of working and processes and policies that would let an organization use Sketchfab or any other future platform and not worry about data, their 3D data and related data being locked in somewhere. And then a kind of a blue sky sort of question: what would a Sketchfab for UK heritage involve, and is it needed in the first place? So currently we're reaching out to folks, asking them to fill out a survey. There's a Welsh language version as well, and asking people to join expert 1-hour interviews covering these topics, digging into needs and practice around 3D data within organizations. So there'll be the research, developing a kind of a practical roadmap and kind of information package, I suppose, that would hopefully lead to some future-proof 3D workflows, or at least indicate the direction and next steps, because this project is, as I say, kind of finite in resources in many ways. So over to everyone on the call then. What do you think? Is over-reliance on third-party commercial platforms like Sketchfab an issue? What are maybe the missing pieces in heritage 3D data archiving and dissemination workflows in your practice? And is there a future for a UK heritage-focused 3D data platform? I'll stop there and jump back to the call. Does that, for one question, is that all clear? And is anyone thinking about any of these topics or have questions about it to begin with? Who will be the first?
I've been typing some notes, but can I put them in the document? Because otherwise I might just dominate what's happening, and I don't want to do that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, please
Yeah.
do, Keith. Yeah. I mean, one thing, I can share more about kind of the project and what I think, but I don't want to lead a conversation in that way because there's some learned folks on this call, and I've spoken to you variously about 3D data, so it'd be good to hear. I might start picking on people if. Getting thumbs up, so that's good. So I get the feeling that this is.
I just got to find the wave button.
Cheers,
So
Patrick.
that's my hand up, I'm afraid. No, I was just going to say sort of one thing about costs involved. Obviously, there's a cost associated with Sketchfab, but one of our issues is that we do a lot of grant-funded projects and sort of limited funding period projects, and to be able to pay for something kind of almost upfront whilst a project has its funding, but once that funding has gone, then something is maintained in perpetuity, or what, as close to in perpetuity as we can. I think that would be a really attractive thing, because that is something that we do really kind of struggle with.
So, for one thing, could you share which organisation you're working at?
Yeah, sorry, we're Heritage 360, so that's a research centre based at the University of York.
And so, if I'm hearing correctly, then as 3D data is produced, it would be in your workflows most financially viable to sort of pay once and know that data is going to be available in, let's say, 500 years. It doesn't matter. Like in perpetuity, I think is the grand desire. I've definitely heard this from other folks as well. I think that the mixture of responses to the survey so far are: we have zero budget, we use Sketchfab because it's free, and the trade-off being that there's very little control of the platform if you don't pay for it. There's also, I mean, in my mind, and maybe folks can sort of tell me that I'm wrong if I am, that there's kind of the data that you create during a digitization project. So all the input data, the raw sensor data and the project files may be very large output files, the most high resolution files that you, the master files, we might call them. And that's one huge data set normally, could be many, many gigabytes or terabytes of data. And then there's data that you put online that people can actually spin around and interact with on the screen, which would be a very different, much more optimized set of data. And the cost of hosting a big data set is very different to a small data set, obviously. And there's organizations, for example, like the Archaeological Data Service and now the Heritage Science Data Service. I see lots of people nodding, so they're aware that these repositories exist where you can pay that fee and put your data with them, and they promise to take care of it. I recently worked on a project that produced about 750 gigabytes of data, and the quote I got from the Heritage Science Data Service, and this may be different for now or for other projects, but I think it was in the region of £6,000 to take care of that data. And maybe that's just the beginning because it's a very new service. Maybe that would change over time. I'm not trying to say it's a terrible thing. I think if you are going to look after huge amounts of data for the long term, you need money. And considering that compared to the responses I've been getting from a survey that say we've got zero budget for archival data, we've got zero budget for dissemination and online publication as well. It's a big part of this. How do you fund it?
Yeah. Well, I'm aware that the Archaeology Data Service are also doing sort of work into this and looking at sort of costing. Well, and I'm sure you probably had sort of chance to chat with them at some point. But yeah, I guess then there's really just a question between the split between a dissemination platform and an archiving platform, and whether both need to go hand in hand, or whether actually it's better to kind of sort of split those out, because some people will be wanting one but not necessarily the other.
Mm. Do you think that's because some folks will already have either the budget or sort of internal data sort of policies, like preservation policies?
Yeah, there is that, but also, and we certainly do projects where our client is simply just not interested in the long-term preservation of their digital data. I mean, what they want is a short-term interactive, which is possibly publicly sort of aimed, but that's going to run for 2 years, say, and then they're happy just to let that go.
Interesting. So that it feels then there that it's a, I don't want to insult the clients, but like it's a shorter term thought process with regards to 3D data, as opposed to,
and that will often come down to the funding which is available. I mean, perhaps if they had more funding and more sort of structure available to them, then they might think in that sort of longer term period. But for them, it's often just simply they have funding for a one hit kind of thing. Then that's it. Then they can just simply move on.
If I can keep picking on you for a second, Patrick, do you, as an organization, when you create data for a client, so I'm assuming we're talking about sort of heritage sort of organizations as the clients, do you offer, we'll hang on to the data for your project for X amount of years, and or is it something that you will hang on to forever, just in case, even if, on hard drives locally or things like that?
Mostly we would hang on. I mean, we've been doing this for probably about sort of 10, 12 years. So, and we still have data from 10, 12 years ago. So, I mean, although our policy kind of says we will hang on to your data for around 5 years, we don't really get rid of anything. No one has ever contacted us to come back and say, actually, we need that data from all that time ago, but we still do kind of sort of hang on to it. But really, we only use Sketchfab, I would say, for a dissemination tool. It's because our clients want to either sort of have those embedded on a website, or they're part of a digital exhibition. In terms of the actual sort of storage and preservation, we will be using probably cloud services and a mix of sort of offline backup as well.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. I didn't mean to make it a Ask Patrick Anything session, but I appreciate kind of that view into your practice.
It's heartening to hear Patrick say that, because that sort of mirrors what I do. So I'm Tom Goskar. I'm an independent 3D specialist and archaeologist. And I tend to, in this space, work with very small organizations, and just hearing Patrick sort of talk about people's very time-limited budgets and short-term sort of outlook, that rings very true. And also the never getting rid of data, and this sort of, I too have hard drives from 15 years ago with things on there, and I'll, as storage gets cheaper, I'll just keep it. But yeah, officially, sort of, I don't keep things that long, but in practice, I do. But I think sort of small organizations, looking at the questionnaire, I think that none of the organizations that I work with here in Cornwall would be able to fill it in. They would get lost at question sort of 4 or 5, and then start getting upset the further they go down, because of things like lack of policies, lack of storage, lack of expertise, budgets that would just make people wonder how on earth they continue to exist on such small amounts of money. But and I think that's why Sketchfab has been such a success, because it's allowed small museums to, as and when they have funding for an HLF project, for example, to have something online, or use Sketchfab to put something on a touch screen in a gallery, or an iPad in the gallery, that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. It would have been too expensive. And then over the years, they can gradually add 1 or 2 or 3 models at a time to their Sketchfab account, but really they have no preservation policies. They're lucky to have if a model has been made of an object in their collection, there might be a note in Modes saying 3D model made in 2018 on hard drive on shelf, and that's about it. So yeah, I think sort of smaller organizations might find it difficult for them to sort of fill in your questionnaire and to reflect in your survey. I think certainly from my experience down here, but yeah, budgets and sort of a free offering, and that being, I think the understanding that this isn't, Sketchfab is not an archive. It is just a you know, it's like how they treat YouTube for their videos. You know, that they see it as public access, and it's done that really well. So I think in terms of what people might like to see, certainly the people that I know, is sort of basically Sketchfab, but with some sort of future to it, because this has been a real wake-up call, I think. And certainly other 3D data that is at risk are, as Patrick was saying, from organizations that had funding, and the funding is now gone. And in some instances, certainly 2 of the Sketchfab accounts I sort of helped organizations to create, those organizations no longer exist. So apart from my hard drives and their Sketchfab account, those organizations don't exist, but some really high quality 3D data still does. And it sort of sits around with people like me. Yeah, I hope that's useful.
Super useful, and thanks, Tom. So I think in terms of for the survey, I admit is fairly dense and involved, especially quite technical. The interviews are hopefully a place where people can have a chat and explain kind of like from whatever level of experience that they're at. So yeah, if you do know folks that want to share their story, then please do let them know. It sounds like a little bit, and folks can kind of put me right, that there's also sort of a communication, a need for communicating to organizations that as you produce data, you are in fact creating an archive of sorts, whether you want to or not, and that they're, this is why you use Sketchfab, this is maybe why you would consider the Heritage Science Data Service or any other platform, and also pointing folks to, and this will be part of kind of what I'm gathering together as well, like existing guidance on data production and data management. So Tom, you and I worked on glam3d.org, which is still, I think, relevant, covering copyright, open access, and 3D data production. And particularly you, Tom, actually wrote the chapter on data storage as well.
Yes.
So I think making sure that folks at least know of resources, know of national level guidance, and it can be a bit all over the place, I think, in terms of what's suggested. Even the National Lottery Heritage Fund website recommends Sketchfab as a place to put your data as well, which again is great for what it does, but it doesn't do other stuff. So yeah, I totally agree that a Sketchfab that isn't Sketchfab would be great. In my mind, I kind of like envisaged it kind of like as a what's the word, like a national platform that it demonstrates the, well, I mean, I hate the phrase, that kind of soft power of culture within the UK, that the data, once you start looking, what's great about Sketchfab is you can search across all of these different collections. They're next to other collections. You can search for, I don't know, Greek amphorae or, megalithic stone sculptures and see what's happened in a different part of the country or the world. So I think that is great. There are projects as well around the world that people may be aware of, the work that the EU are doing with regards to kind of a unified platform, the European Cultural Collaborative Cloud for Cultural Heritage. And another example is there's a really nice bit of work being done by the Korean Heritage, what are they called? Korean Heritage Service, where they have a self-published, or rather they self-publish their 3D reconstructions on their own website, but then they also have a Sketchfab profile, a fab.com profile, a Unity asset store profile. So they're in a way safe with their data that they're hosting themselves. Their website doesn't have any interactive element to it. You can just download a 3D file, but then they use these other platforms to reach more audiences. So that feels like maybe a direction is to kind of help people be secure and be able to use every platform available But then I suppose it's time, maintaining these things if you start putting them other places, and being able to fund it, things like that. Is anyone else got anything in their head? And honestly, I would really value any. There's no such thing as a silly question. Hi, Keith.
Yeah, I've had I can't tell you who it is because the organisation in question have asked me to remain anonymous at the moment. But it's an interesting story, and it counters one of the points I put in the questions. We went to various places over the last couple of years, modelling sculptures mainly. And one particular sculpture that we modelled, quite a nice 3D model came out of it. I learnt shortly before Christmas, some building contractors came in, knocked it over and smashed it up. And courtesy of the insurance, it's now with restorers. They know how to put it right. And often I imagine when restorers try to repair these things, they have 1 or 2 photographs. And the owners of the sculpture got back to me, and I was able to send them, I think, 370 photographs of different views of this thing, which they found quite useful, along with the 3D model itself. So there's obviously value in having these 3D reconstructions of cultural heritage, because when something like that happens, it helps. And then I've met people who are the exact opposite, and I'm thinking of the 2 that have wound me up the most, the Royal Collection Trust and Greenwich Museums, both of whom will not let me anywhere near any of their stuff to create 3D models. They've got some sort of in-house policy, dogma, whatever, and I can't even get in the door. And I just thought I'd mention this because A, it's bugging me, and B, I can actually see a benefit from the other direction. If they did let their things be modelled, it would be a benefit to them, really, because in case something like this happened where somebody comes along and knocks the bloody statue over, that's it, really. It's a story that's in my mind at the moment. Because
Yeah. I mean, as I say, I think there's kind of communicating, because for a lot of organizations, there's no 3D capture or production studio in-house. They may rely on outside organizations, and there's sometimes perhaps healthy skepticism around technology and folks coming in from the outside. But then you're also talking about, it sounds like, the benefits, and making it clear, like, what can you benefit from having 3D data? And it sounds also like you're talking about not just the 3D models, but also the input images for that, and hanging on to them. So there's a lot of, I think, education of explaining, and I mean, there's enough resources out there online, but every organization approaches these things completely differently, in my experience. And from my experience, every organization creates their 3D data slightly differently, looks after it slightly differently, has slightly different audience needs. And in a way, I suppose Sketchfab is a kind of one-stop shop for a lot of these different needs, meeting a lot of these different needs. And it's just a bit of a shame that it's currently, I mean, tomorrow there may be changes to the plans that was announced at the end of 2023, or I can't remember exactly when, that Sketchfab will be transitioning to the fab.com marketplace, and things will be changing. That's quite a while ago now, and there's been a lot of silence. So things might go any which way, but I think it's being able to kind of plan for and deal with any eventuality that we're hopefully aiming at. I mean, is in terms of then folks on this call who have some 3D data already, are there some burning issues, or again, anything that we've covered already that's got you thinking about needs for the future? And also, if you feel like I'm completely on the wrong track with this research as well, that's also valuable feedback. Hi again, Patrick.
Sorry, I don't dominate. Just following up a little bit on Keith's point. What we have noticed is that I think there's still a lot of fear and trepidation, certainly amongst smaller collections holding organisations, about what 3D data and the capture of 3D data represents. I mean, it feels a little bit like that. Initially, when online collections were first started going, a lot of collections were getting their sort of imagery online, but everybody was terrified that someone would nick it all and then commercialize and put it on teacups and things like that. It really does feel kind of a little bit like that now with 3D data, that if you do have a scan, somehow it's going to get out. Someone's going to make 3D prints from it, and you'll see it in tat shops around the UK. I think then I'm not sure whether it is part of your sort of remit, Tom, to have some sort of guidance and help for sort of smaller organisations in sort of comprehending what the generation of 3D data and scanning and what can be done, what can't be done is that part of your sort of overall outlook on this project?
Not as part of this project, but over the years, I mean, as I mentioned, clam3d.org as an introduction. It's designed as an introduction kind of white paper for anyone considering working with 3D within a heritage organization. And then in my work at Sketchfab, there's plenty of presentations that I've done on, look, you can do this. There's one even called 10 things you can do with 3D models, and obviously that publishing them online is one of them. There's so much content out there related to the benefits of 3D data. I think it's there already, so it's not part of this project, but I see it as kind of at least with regards to the management of 3D data and why it's difficult to do the kind of end user stuff if you haven't got the data available in the first place, and that's, I think, what we're concerned with.
No, I agree. I mean, obviously, yeah, you're absolutely right. There is some really good stuff out there at the moment, but obviously that doesn't necessarily mean that people, certainly in smaller organisations, you don't have the huge amount of time. They're going to go and hunt that out. It is often word of mouth from other organisations. Often those organisations may have had a bad experience at some point, and then that sort of gets around. And I know it's very hard to have an aggressive policy of trying to get this information into these organisations, but. Yeah.
Well, so there's a need then at least for some signposting to those kind of resources that illustrate the positive side of 3D data production and exploitation, shall we call it, of that data. Okay, that's good to know. Anybody else on the call got anything? Peter. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Peter. I'm the conservation manager at the River Baths. I'm on the call with my colleague Laura as well. It's just something that we're kind of chatting in the background, and we noticed that quite a few people were like, oh, we've got things on hard drives that we kind of can access. I think from our point of view, we are very, 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 very new to this. This isn't part of our job, so we're kind of learning. So thanks very much for kind of talking about this today. And we do have some images on hard drive that were created as part of a project about 5 years ago that we can't access. So we don't create these images ourselves. We would get Wessex or Cotswolds in, or someone similar to do the project for us, and then we have a model at the end. But part of our process is to be able to use those images for condition reporting and for conservation purposes. So although we've got these great images on the hard drive, we can't use them because our IT have restrictions on what we can plug in. So in terms of storage for the future, we would like to move away from having things saved on external hard drives and somewhere that we can access them. Our IT doesn't have the infrastructure to cope with the number and the kind of deluge and kind of the cost of all of that. So I mean, I'm very new. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but that's an issue that we want to kind of address, so we can use the end product, the 3D model, for whatever purposes, whether that's conservation or education or research, but have the files that we can look at to know whether there's been damage to something or deterioration to something. So moving away from hard drives to a more kind of accessible storage that's not too expensive.
Totally understandable. Thanks, Peter. That's like a really good insight into what you're dealing with. Your organization falls under, in terms of IT, the local authority, the council. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And I think that's true for a lot of smaller organizations. And it's, an interesting thing to hear that there's this broad range of, it's conservation we're talking about, but it's also, I assume, reaching the general public with, information about the collections that you're in charge of as well. And in my mind, I think these are quite different pursuits in terms of what you're doing with 3D, and they need very different tools, they need very different interfaces, they need, and they're varyingly complex in terms of, at least my understanding of how it could be developed or implemented using existing things. So it feels like there is maybe part of this research will be kind of like trying to what's the word, kind of just at least illustrate that, you can't, it's very unlikely that a single platform would do everything for everyone, and that is in fact illustrated, I think, with Sketchfab. But maybe through the research, some things will become more evidently, not necessarily important, but more commonly, a common reason for using 3D. And yeah, as well, Peter, thanks for joining an interview previously as well, because this is all great context.
Starting at the bottom, I would say, with us, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, I mean, you would be surprised. I mean, at the British Museum, when I was there and we were making 3D, it was very much making up as we went along. Because, we're talking 2014, there wasn't much guidance on what to do with 3D data, how to do it. Things now that are being talked about in terms of metadata and paradata and organizing your data weren't being talked about then, but it's through the process of all this time. I think sometimes of Sketchfab as a necessary period of experimentation in the grand scheme of things, and it's a great way to learn, what do audiences want, what do internal audiences and staff want as well, and then build on that, I think, is what I would hope. And maybe if we'll look at follow-on funding after this project, if this research indicates an appetite and a need in certain ways. We've only got sort of 15 minutes left on this call, I'm afraid, and obviously you can keep in contact with me after, but I do want to give over these last 15 minutes because I've been talking a lot. Anybody on the call who hasn't said hi or shared, or maybe I should actually look at the document. Oh, questions. Before I go and look at the questions in the document, does anybody want to share anything, ask anything? Okay. I'll just nip over to the document then and try, if we haven't already addressed all of these questions. There was a suggestion Sketchfab was to close. Is this still the case? Currently, yes. According to the latest public postings from Sketchfab and Epic Games, the plan is to wind down Sketchfab and move features over to fab.com. And I don't think much has changed in the last 12 months, as far as I've seen on Sketchfab. What about content creators who no longer exist? This is a good point. I did my review of cultural heritage users back in November, and as I was reaching out for with the survey and such, I've noticed that some organizations that I had down as having 70 3D models are now, they have no 3D models on Sketchfab, which suggests to me that maybe their subscription ended and their 3D data has gone offline because it exceeds the free account limit. Sometimes folks have removed their content or deleted their profile as well. So anecdotally, it's happening. And as Tom was saying as well, the organizations sometimes disappear and the data is orphaned. Andy.
Hello. I just this might be relevant. I was involved in restoring Google Poly. I wasn't involved in saving the data, which was an informal organisation called Archive Team, which you may know of, who are loosely affiliated with archive.org. But I've been involved in restoring access to it and getting a website back up for all the old Google Polyap data. It sounds like a very similar scenario. Is anyone in touch with Archive Team about archiving Sketchfab data that might be lost?
I'm not, but I think this is a conversation that I'd love to have with you, Andy, to discuss such an option or share, the possibility.
Yeah, we can. If you want to get in touch offline after this call, I'd really like to share what little I know on the preservation side and what I can help with on the restoration side.
I think that would be very good for data that has been made openly accessible and downloadable. And then the 3D data that is not downloadable is a different question. Maybe there's things you can do publicly via the APIs and such, but for Sketchfab, but more tricky when an organization no longer has access to its Sketchfab account and nothing's publicly downloadable, probably. Cool, thanks, Andy. I'm going to try and whiz through these questions as we go. Policy, I think is that from you, Keith, the policy?
Yeah, that was me.
Okay.
Yeah, we've covered that.
Okay. Next question, Sketchfab is not UK specific. Could whatever comes out of this be usable beyond the UK? So from initial responses to the survey, quite a few people, when asked about data sovereignty, so where is your data stored, have mentioned specifically that they would like the data to be stored within the UK. So that would mean that the data would be managed under UK law, for one thing, as opposed to Sketchfab servers, which are typically in the US and maybe in Europe, as far as I remember. In theory, if a UK platform existed, I think if you can see it online, you can see it online, and that would be usable beyond the UK. And again, it might be positive in its promotion of the heritage sector within the UK in that regard. So yeah, definitely, I think things that are online can be used beyond the UK, I think. So that interactive as well as maybe open access data and academic data, publishing research data, I think. Our project is finite with specific end dates for funding. How can a provider take this into account? Well, I think this is about funding, and either you block in the money that is going to cover the indefinite hosting of the data, or a platform would need to figure out a funding model that is cheap enough for people to pay in an annual basis, or is funded by, government funding or by philanthropy. I suppose there are many ways to explore kind of how you would fund something, but you need the money, I think, is the definite indication. One of the biggest turnoffs for using Sketchfab is increasingly the noise from non-cultural heritage users. Fairly often not safe for work material, sitting alongside vases, statues, coins. A cultural heritage specific platform would be great. Yeah, I think this is a very relevant point. Sketchfab is for every person using 3D material. There's a lot of like risque material, and there's also a lot of rips or kind of extracted copyright material that's being reposted. It's kind of, if you look at it in certain ways, it's not a good look for cultural heritage users, organizations to use or be amongst that. But at the same time, I think a lot of them will be embedding, so folks, end users might not even be using Sketchfab. But this also, anecdotally from my time at Sketchfab, prevented Sketchfab being used in, for example, schools, because it's a 13 plus platform now. That was one of the changes when the platform was bought by Epic Games. It was simply blocked by some internet providers within school context. So then you're not reaching, because of the content that's alongside it, you're not reaching perhaps an audience that you would wish to reach. So there's something there around labeling of content and even within cultural heritage collections, there may be some content, human remains, content that indigenous communities may not wish to have access to. So there's things about managing access and display, or at least communicating before people access content as well, regardless of whether it's not safe for work and risque material. But that's good to hear that a cultural heritage specific platform would be great. Last thing I've got in my list is whatever is built or suggested would need to be WCAG 2.2 AA compliant, as this is something many institutions have to comply with online. So if you're not familiar with WCAG 2.2 AA, and I'm not 100% fluent, but it's essentially a standard for accessibility. So whether your web content can be accessed by different users with different abilities, so visual impairments, or being able to use a mouse or a keyboard to navigate content as well. So a good point about accessibility points. This is a trickier one, I think, to implement or implement with actual interactive 3D data. So we're talking about the 3D viewer itself, the 3D model, whereas you could make, if you have a web page with kind of all the description of the subject and like the metadata and other information, I think text content, image content is maybe easier to make accessibility compliant, whereas 3D data, how do you... There are people experimenting with it. Google Model Viewer have done a bit of work. The Smithsonian team has done a bit of work on accessibility. But if you imagine how would somebody with visual impairments navigate a 3D model, and how would you describe from different angles what you're looking at when you have full 360 control? So totally agree that accessibility compliance is a must. And in fact, a lot of organizations, they're mandated to have compliant data as well if they're state funded as well. That's all the questions I've got in the document right now. We've got about seven minutes left. Andy, is your hand still up, or was that? I've got a... Okay, thanks. Kirsty, hello.
Discussing. Hi. On that point around accessibility, does anyone know if there is? You mentioned it when you were talking there, Tom. Does anyone know if there is any guidance on like how you, like the steps to describe a model, or how you would do it if they're viewing it in a 3D viewer and they have a visual impairment? Because so I'm at National Museum Scotland, and part of my remit is all accessibility around digital products, and our organisation uses Sketchfab. Like it's mainly the curators that use it. So it would be trying to incorporate accessibility guidance into any form of 3D data. But I don't know if there's anything written right now.
I'll open that to the rest of the call if anyone's aware of anything. A few shaky heads. Kirsty, I can share the links to the presentation that the folks at Google Model Viewer shared online, and try and find the stuff from the Smithsonian as well.
That'd be great.
But yeah, they're the examples that I can think of.
Cool.
Any other kind of final thoughts on either using Sketchfab? So I can share a couple of things before we finish on chats that I've had. But anyone else got any burning questions? Well, one of the calls that I've had, or two that I'll share two conversations that I've had as part of the interview process. So I'm talking to specifically people who are working with heritage 3D data, of course, but also I've been chatting to an expert in in Sketchfab APIs about the possibility of, how would data extraction work or data backup work, and that sounds very positive. Obviously, you need to have budget to create something, but that may be possible to make a tool that backs up your profile. And then I've also began conversations with folks about how to work ethically with 3D data. And so this is, in my mind, it's not just, well, it's two things: the production of media related to culturally sensitive content, but then how does one flag online that content is published with permission or under certain ethical restrictions? How do you manage access based on the will of a particular community, things like that? And so this is something that I want to look at beyond common. We're going to end in one minute. Beyond common things like considerations like copyright and licensing. So managing the ethical side of things, and maybe even flagging things like the sustainable access of sustainable impact of publishing data. I'm going to stop talking now because we're going to get kicked off this call. I hope this has been informative and an interesting conversation. Thank you all for joining. Do keep in contact. Please fill out the survey if you can, and book in an interview. All the links are in the document and in the presentation. But other than that, I wish you all a very wonderful rest of your week. Thank you for your time.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.